Were there any eyewitnesses located by the department or by the task force to the homicide of Julie Group?
No.
Are you aware of whether or not, after testing, there was any foreign male DNA located on swabs taken from Ms. Group's person?
Yes, there was.
And which swabs were those?
Ms. Green, I believe it was a vaginal swab.
I want to move now to speak about the third victim in this case in the indictment. That victim, who was the third victim?
And the third victim was Owana Patton,
And when was Ms. Patton located by the police?
February 24th, 2006.
Do you know who located her and how she was located?
Yes, she was located by, I believe, a man who was either walking by or driving by. And he called 911, stating that he found the body.
And where was Ms. Patton located?
She was located on an access road, corner of Mason Avenue and Williamson Avenue in the city of Daytona Beach.
Is there a prominent building you're familiar with that's in that general area now?
Yes, its current address is 129 Valor Boulevard, and it's the Daytona Beach Police Department.
At that time, was the area developed at all?
No.
Other than the access road?
No, it was not.
In regard to Ms. Patton, what condition was her body in when she was located?
Ms. Patton she was also naked. She was found, wearing only a pair of socks. She was also found face down. Her clothes were found near her body. And it also appeared that she had been recently killed.
And did she have any among her set of clothes were near her body?
Yes, sir.
Among her clothes was any identifying information located, such as an ID card, credit cards, bank cards, anything of that nature?
No, sir.
Were investigators able to identify her as well through fingerprints?
Yes.
And did the department and investigators do a background of her as well?
Yes.
And what did you learn in regards to what's relevant about this investigation, the similarities between these victims? What did Daytona Beach learn?
According to one of Ms. Patton's coworkers, she was engaging in prostitution to supplement her income.
How old was Ms. Patton at the time of her death?
35 years old.
And was she white, black, or Hispanic?
Ms. Patton was black.
Was an autopsy also performed on Ms. Patton at the medical examiner's office?
Yes.
And for Ms. Patton, what was the cause and manner of death? Do you know?
The cause of death was a gunshot wound to the head, and the manner of death was a homicide.
And as part of that autopsy, are you aware of whether or not any swabs were collected from her person?
Yes.
And did that include vaginal swabs?
Yes, it did.
And were those vaginal swabs submitted to the Florida Department of Law Enforcement for analysis and comparison?
Yes.
Was any other physical evidence, you mentioned her clothing, but any other physical evidence recovered at the crime scene by crime scene investigators when her body was located in February of 2006?
Yes, a .40 caliber shell casing was recovered.
And was that shell casing also submitted to the Florida Department of Law Enforcement?
Yes, it was.
Were there any eyewitnesses to the homicide of Ms. Owana Patton?
Not that I know of.
Now, you reviewed the lab reports for 2006, right?
Yes.
Was any foreign DNA located on the vaginal swabs collected from Ms. Patton?
Yes.
Was there any comparison done in that report in regard to Ms. Patton between the foreign male DNA recovered from Ms. Patton's vaginal swabs and Ms. Gunther's oral swabs?
Yes.
And what was FDLE's opinion at that time in 2006 between those two foreign male DNAs?
That the DNA recovered from Ms. Patton matched the DNA recovered from Ms. Gunther.
And was there a particular word that FDLE used to describe it?
Sure there is. I can't think of it right now.
To refresh your recollection, take a look at the FDLE report.
Yes, sir.
Just highlight it. Portion of that report. Memories refresh, just like that. Okay, so you refresh your recollection of the exact terminology that FDLE used regarding looking at the profile recovered from Ms. Gunther and the profile recovered from Ms. Patton.
Yes.
And what was the exact terminology that FDLE used?
According to FDLE, it was consistent.
And I understand that the court's instruction on not using the term serial killer, but just for a couple of questions,
Well, that's fine. I mean, for purposes of the hearing, I'm okay with it. That doesn't influence me. For purposes of the trial, I think that would tend to influence it.
Yes.
So you're welcome to use it here, but just as long as we get prepared for the future.
Was the consistent match between those DNA profiles, was that something that led the department to believe that it might have a serial killer on its hands back in 2006?
Yes.
Was something else the shell casings that were submitted to the labs as well?
Yes.
Did you review the laboratory reports from the comparisons of the .40 caliber shell casings located at the third crime scene and the second crime scene?
Yes.
And what was the opinion, and again, I know you're not a firearms expert, but what was your understanding of the opinion of Mr. Felix, the analyst who reviewed those items?
That the shell casings were fired from the same weapon.
And was the actual casings or the ammunition, were they the same as well? The markings, I should say, the stamp label on the casings?
Yes.
And was Mr. Felix ever able to opine whether or not he could identify a specific type of firearm that those casings or those projectiles were shot from?
Yes, he was.
And what particular type of firearm would have shot or discharged those casings?
A .40 caliber Smith & Wesson model VE.
Model what?
VE, Victor Edward.
Just going back to the ammunition, the actual stamp on the casings, what type was that?
Federal. I believe it was Federal Smith & Wesson.
So going back to the years of the task force in 06 and 07, were those the two primary leads that the department of the task force had in investigating these homicides?
Yes.
And also you had the tire imprint as well.
Yes.
Actually, with the tire imprint, was there ever actually a matching tire located and compared to by FDLE, and they found that it was, according to FDLE, the exact tire that left those imprints at the crime scene?
Yes.
And where was that tire located?
At a salvage yard called DeLand U-Pullet.
And was that a location that was being actively surveilled by the task force?
Yes.
What kind of yard?
Salvage. Like a junkyard.
Yeah.
Do you know if that tire was taken off a vehicle by investigators, or if it was located in just a stack of tires?
It was located in a stack of tires.
Was any association ever made between that tire and any particular vehicle that may or may not have been at the crime scene?
No, sir.
In regards to the DNA evidence the department had, were buccal swabs, was that something that the department keyed on to collect buccal swabs as many as they could voluntarily from individuals individuals to submit for comparison to FDLE?
Yes.
In regard to the information regarding the Smith & Wesson 40 caliber BE firearm and the federal cases, what did the task force and investigators do with that information back in 2006?
The task force set out and attempted to identify all people who had purchased a Smith & Wesson 40 VE in the Daytona Beach, Volusia County area.
So did they actually go to the individuals or businesses that sold firearms or sold that type of firearm?
Yes.
Was Buck's Guns one of those locations?
Yes.
And when they would locate or say they get a list from Buck's Guns of individuals who had purchased the Smith & Wesson 40 caliber BE firearm, what would they then do, or would investigators end up doing with that list of individuals who had purchased that firearm from a location such as Buck's Guns?
They would attempt to contact the person who purchased the gun. They would ask them if they could borrow the gun for a little bit to test fire it. And they would also ask the person to submit to a local squad.
And do you know whether or not the defendant in this case, Mr. Hayes, had purchased that type of firearm from Buck's Guns back in the fall of 2005?
Yes.
And how do you know that?
From records obtained from Buck's Gun Rack.
What type of records?
We spoke about the leads program earlier. There's a lead specifically about that, about people that purchased that type of firearm from Buck's Gun Rack. But then also Buck's Gun Rack provided the transaction record from when Mr. Hayes purchased the firearm.
Like the sale receipt?
Yes.
And did he also purchase some ammunition as well from Buck's Guns in fall of 2005?
Yes, he did.
And was that the same ammunition that was recovered at the crime scene, or the same type of case, I should say?
Yes, sir.
Did investigators with the task force end up making contact with Mr. Hayes based upon this lead?
Yes.
And do you recall which investigators it was?
Mr. Hayes was contacted twice. The first time was by a Daytona Beach detective, J.J. Warren. And then the second time, it was from a task force member. I believe it was, I can't remember his name. I have it, I mean, if you want me to, I have it there. If you want me to refresh my memory.
That's okay, but it was a member of the task force in contact.
Yes, sir.
Okay. And was Mr. Hayes able to provide the 40 caliber Smith & Wesson VE to law enforcement for the test fire and get the casings and send them that DLE for comparison?
No, he was not able to do so.
And did Mr. Hayes give a reason, based on your review of the case file, why he could not provide law enforcement with the firearm when they requested?
Yes, Mr. Hayes stated that he gave the firearm to his mother, Florence Hayes.
And are you aware generally that even the month that we find that one month this happened, that law enforcement spoke with him and requested the firearm?
I believe it was March in 2006.
I want to move ahead now to talk about the case after you inherited, because that summarizes, does that summarize the 3 victims from 2005 and 2006?
Yes.
And you already testified that there were no significant leads or DNA matches when you took over the case in 2015.
Correct.
In December of 2016, did you receive some information from the Florida Department of Law Enforcement that kicked the investigation kind of back into gear, gave you an active lead to pursue?
Yes, sir.
And what was that information, sir?
It was information that the unknown male DNA recovered in our 2 cases was a match to unknown DNA located in Palm Beach County homicide.
Okay. So the unknown male DNA, and they are 2 cases. Are you mainly talking about the DNA sample from Ms. Gunther?
Yes.
Okay. So there was a CODIS hit between Ms. Gunther's DNA and DNA of Palm Beach County case.
Yes.
as a result of getting this CODIS hit, how did that affect your investigation? I mean, before December 2016, what were you doing? I mean, what was going on with the investigation before you got that CODIS hit?
There really wasn't much going on. The case had become, for lack of a better term, the case had become cold and had been for many years. So this kind of just definitely jump-started things and brought the investigation back to life.
How quickly did you reach out to Palm Beach County after getting that CODIS hit in December of 2016?
Immediately.
And did you meet with investigators or lead investigators related to that case to discuss their case and learn the facts of their case?
Yes, sir.
And do you recall whether or not you went there or they came here?
We met several times. I believe the first time, detectives from Palm Beach County as well as the state attorney's office came to Daytona Beach. But then at other times, I also went to Palm Beach County.
And after you met with Palm Beach County, can you describe to the court the course of the investigation? I may jump into some follow-up questions, but the course of the investigation over the next 2 years, so 2017 and 2018.
Basically, we began a joint investigation between the Daytona Beach Police Department and the Palm Beach County Sheriff's Office, as well as the state attorney's office. We began a joint investigation. They came up and reviewed our case. We reviewed their case.
In your review of their case, was there, at least as the investigator related to these Daytona cases, was there anything striking about that Palm Beach County case other than just the CODIS hit?
Yeah, I mean, other than the CODIS hit, the fact that the Palm Beach County victim, Rachel Bay, was found naked in a remote area, kind of in the middle of nowhere, like Daytona Beach's second and third victims, in an area under construction, also kind of like our second and third victim.
At some point in 2017, 2018, and going back and forth with Palm Beach County and deciding the course of the investigation, did the idea of genetic genealogy ever come?
Yes, sir.
And I know you're a lay person, but as the lead investigator on the Daytona cases, what was your understanding of how genetic genealogy could assist in your investigation in terms of locating the source of this foreign DNA?
My understanding was and is that if we were able to upload our unknown male profile into a genetic database, that we could enter it and then see if it's kind of like how people use it to find relatives that they don't know about. We could upload our subject's DNA and see if we could get a hit on some relatives to pursue an investigation that way to identify them.
And did both Daytona Beach and Palm Beach County, did you guys initially use a private laboratory for this purpose?
Yes.
And what was that private laboratory?
It's called Parabon.
Can you spell that?
Parabon.
P is in Henry. P-A-R-A.
Yes.
G-A-O-N.
I'm sorry, B-O-N. Bravo, Oscar, Parabon.
Now, did Daytona Beach Police Department and the Palm Beach County Sheriff's Office, did y'all continue to use Parabon throughout the process, or was eventually done by a state agency?
We began with Parabon, but after Parabon began to do the work, the Florida Department of Law Enforcement began its own genetic genealogy unit, and when they took over doing the work from Parabon.
And who from FDLE handled at least the genealogy aspect of it?
Okay, her name is Lori, Lori, and the last name is Napolitano.
And over the years, working with Parabon and then with Lori at FDLE, Lori Napolitano, is you understand that a connection was made through the databases that were being accessed to the samples you had provided to FDLE to locate a relative potentially of these suspects?
Yes.
And who was the connection made to?
So early on, there was a distant relative who was identified. It turned out to be probably like a third cousin or something like that. But later on, and that was, like I said, that was in the beginning stages. Later on in 2019, we got a hit on a much closer relative. Her name is Terrace Collins.
And what was, based upon your understanding of the connection through genetic genealogy, what was the relationship, the familiar relationship she would have had to the source of the DNA?
That Ms. Collins would have been a half sibling to our male contributor.
So obviously with this information, did the Daytona Beach Police Department and the Sheriff's Office in Palm Beach County research Ms. Collins and learn about her siblings?
Yes, sir.
And how many half male siblings did she have?
She had, we found 4, but one of them was discounted because looking at the DNA, FDLE was able to tell us that we were looking for a half sibling on her mother's side. So there was one that was discounted, and then there was 3 possibilities.
Was the defendant in this case, Robert Tyrone Hayes, one of those possible people?
Yes, he was.
One of those half siblings, I should say. Who were the other 2 half siblings that were identified through your investigation?
One of them was John Barfield. And
Barfield?
Barfield, Barfield. And then the other one was Jesse Fleming.
Jeffrey last name?
Jesse. And then the last name is Fleming, Fleming.
When these 3 individuals were identified, Mr. Hayes was, potential suspect at that point. Did you do an investigation into Mr. Hayes' background?
Yes, sir.
And were you able to actually develop a timeline of Mr. Hayes, where he'd been pretty much from 2000, 2005 through 2016?
Yes, there was I did some initial background work, and then there was a more extensive timeline completed that I didn't complete, but I did receive it.
Okay. Can you tell the court briefly about Mr. Hayes and where he was between the years of 2005 and 2016?
Yes. Mr. Hayes was originally from Palm Beach County, came up to Daytona Beach in 2000 to attend Bethune-Cookman University, where he graduated in 2006. After graduating from Bethune-Cookman, he ended up in Atlanta, Georgia for a time, as well as North Carolina, before returning to Palm Beach County sometime in approximately 2013 or 2014.
You said he graduated from Bethune-Cookman in 06?
Yes, sir.
Was that the end of the spring term of 06?
It would have been, my understanding is May or June of 2006.
And was he back in Palm Beach County, living in Palm Beach County at the time of Rachel Bay's murder?
Yes, he was.
And looking into Mr. Hayes' background, did you also learn about him reporting a firearm stolen? And I correct myself, so I said 2009 in my opening, but I think you're going to correct me on the date. When did he report a firearm stolen?
Mr. Hayes reported a firearm stolen in Riviera Beach on December 15th, 2006.
Was there a particular type of firearm that he reported stolen?
Sorry, what month?
December?
Of 2006.
Yes, December 15th, 2006.
Was there a particular type of firearm that he reported stolen?
Yes.
And what type was that?
Smith & Wesson 40 caliber VE.
So that was made to the Riviera Beach Police Department?
Yes.
Once Palm Beach County and Daytona Beach Police Department had the information about these 3 potential suspects, these 3 half brothers of Terrence Collins, was a plan developed to attempt to surreptitiously collect DNA from these individuals?
Yes,
And who took the lead on that aspect of the investigation?
the Palm Beach County Sheriff's Office.
So Mr. Hayes was living in, Mr. Hayes and his half brothers were living in that jurisdiction.
Yes, sir.
Were you present for the surreptitious collection of DNA from Mr. Hayes?
No, I was not.
What's your understanding of what was recovered from Mr. Hayes?
Mr. Hayes was observed at a bus stop in Palm Beach County, drinking from a can of Steel Reserve beer and smoking a cigarette. And when Mr. Hayes got on the bus, Palm Beach County Sheriff's investigator collected those two items.
With this investigation, with all the submissions and the data and working with genetic genealogy, were you working with one particular lab analyst for comparisons to the DNA recovered from 2005 and 2006?
Yes,
And who was that analyst with that deal?
Jillian White.
In regard to Palm Beach County, it's a little bit different down there. They have their own lab, right?
Yes,
So they have their own analyst separate from the Florida Department of Law Enforcement.
yes,
To your knowledge, was the DNA surreptitiously recovered from Mr. Hayes submitted to Jillian White?
yes,
And did she recover a complete profile from the, we said a beer can and a cigarette?
yes,
And are you aware of any results made, or any results of the comparison between that surreptitiously collected DNA and the DNA recovered from Laquetta Gunther, the first victim's oral swabs?
yes.
And what was that?
That the DNA recovered in 2019 from the beer can and the cigarette matched the DNA recovered from Ms. Gunther.
And what about any comparison made by the Florida Department of Law Enforcement to the swabs recovered, the vaginal swabs recovered from the third victim, Ms. Patton?
That was a match as well.
Was one of the matches stronger than the other, do you recall?
I believe the match that Ms. Patton was. Right. Could be wrong.
Okay.
He's using the word match. I'm assuming that they use a different word.
Yes, Your Honor, and you're going to hear from that DOE
Okay.
regarding that information. Ultimately, was Mr. Hayes arrested in Palm Beach County?
Yes,
Was that initially for the Palm Beach County case?
yes,
Are you aware of whether or not there was a match there as well between foreign male DNA recovered from that victim, Rachel Bay?
yes,
To your knowledge, was Mr. Hayes interviewed when he was arrested?
yes, he was interviewed.
And which agency interviewed?
There was a detective from the Palm Beach County Sheriff's Office as well as an investigator from the State Attorney's Office.
From which down there.
From down there, yes.
When Mr. Hayes was arrested, was a search warrant executed by Palm Beach County to collect buccal swabs from him?
Yes, sir.
And did that confirm the DNA results, to your knowledge, confirm the DNA results of FDLE and Jillian White?
Yes, it confirmed the match.
I just want to be clear for the court, was a comparison also done, to your knowledge, between the foreign DNA recovered from the second victim, Julie Green, to Mr. Hayes' buccal swabs?
Yes,
And
Say it again.
was a comparison made between the buccal swabs from Mr. Hayes and the foreign DNA recovered from the second victim, Julie Green, done as well?
yes, that was done.
Right, and was that one a match like the other two?
No, it was not a match.
To your knowledge, has that DNA ever been matched or hit in any way?
Not to my not to my knowledge.
Did you ever have the opportunity to speak with Mr. Hayes?
Yes, briefly.
And were you with anybody when you spoke with him?
Yes,
And who was that?
an investigator from the State Attorney's Office in Daytona Beach, Rich Brendel.
Briefly for the court, was there anything that he mentioned of importance about his location or his activities at the time back in 2005 and 2006 when he was, based on your timeline, attending the fifth court?
Yes, Mr. Hayes, he did state that he was that he did go to Bethune-Cookman University. And then while he was up there in college, he did have something to the effect that he did have a lot of one-night stands with women he met either on Main Street or Ridgewood, and that some of them like to get paid.
I do want to go back to Mr. Hayes' days at Bethune-Cookman as well. Were you able to determine where he was living specifically in 2005 and 2006 in the city of Daytona Beach?
Yes,
And did he live on campus or did he have someplace off campus?
off campus.
Did he have any roommates?
Yes,
Have you attempted to speak to those roommates? Or
To-
roommate?
to one roommate, yes.
Have you been able to successfully speak to that person?
No,
Were members of Mr. Hayes' family also interviewed by investigators from the Palm Beach County Sheriff's Office and from the Daytona Beach Police Department at the time or around the time of his arrest as well?
yes,
Did that include his mother, Florence Hayes?
yes.
And what, did you do that interview?
No, I did not.
All right. Have you reviewed the contents of that interview?
Yes.
Was there anything noteworthy in her statement to, I believe it was Detective Jason Wallace who interviewed her? Was there anything noteworthy that she told Detective Wallace?
Yes, I mean, she did state that Mr. Hayes came up to Daytona Beach to go to college around 2005. I mean, in 2000 up until, I think she said 2005 or 6. But then Detective Wallace asked Ms. Hayes if Robert had ever given her a firearm, and she stated that he had never given her a firearm.
And did the investigators also speak with one of Mr. Hayes' brothers?
Yes.
Did that brother say anything on the reports?
He also stated that Mr. Hayes came up to Daytona Beach to go to college, and that Mr. Barfield also stated that Robert Hayes never gave their mother a firearm.
Just that one moment, Ron.
Yes.
Just one other thing I want to touch on just briefly. Just for the court's knowledge, was somebody actually writing the department a letter, I believe in the fall of last year, right, to the attorney's office, a letter claiming responsibility for the death of Julie Green?
He spelled her name wrong, but yes.
And who was that?
Ryan Howell.
And did you interview or attempt to interview Mr. Howell?
Yes.
Was his DNA collected pursuant to search warrant from Mr. Howell?
Yes.
And where was Mr. Howell when you interviewed him?
He was in prison at the Santa Rosa Correctional Institute.
Are you aware of that? His DNA, are you aware whether his DNA was compared to the still unknown foreign DNA from Julie Green?
Yes.
And was that a match in any way?
No, it was not.
Howell is common spelling, Howell.
Yes.
No, I do not have any further questions for Detective Denham.
Yes, sir.
Thank you, Your Honor. Detective Devani, nice to speak with you again. I understand that there were 20 boxes associated with this case when you took it over, is that correct?
Approximately, yes.
And your testimony today basically is a summary of what we would normally call hearsay. It's not something that you personally have knowledge of other than what you went through these boxes and accumulated and gave some specific answers to identify some of the evidence. Right?
Yes, sir.
Would it be true to say that it is not a complete rendition of all of the evidence and the findings of the evidence? It's just a summary of certain issues that you wanted to establish.
Yes, sir.
Now, is it also true that some of the information that you gave may not be totally correct, but I think when you answered this question, you were asked how wide was it between the alleyway where you found Gunther, and I believe you indicated it was a couple of feet, do you have the knowledge from the reports of how wide that was?
I believe I said 20 to 24 inches.
If I would it be correct to say that if someone else measured it, like Detective Young, that he found it was 1 foot and 3/4 inches, 1 foot and 3/4 wide. Would that bring back your memory on the distance?
I would trust whatever Detective Youngman came up with.
So your original statement is just a guess. In other words, it wasn't a factual statement of how wide it was. It was just a guess that you were testifying.
It was an approximation, yes.
Now, I'd like to go on to this DNA. The term was used by the examiner, the FDA expert, that was consistent. What meaning do you give to the word consistent?
To me, that would mean a match.
Would it be correct that that's not a match? Under terminology used when they did the STRs back in those days, consistent was just a guess based on the analyst's interpretation of numbers, in other words, and plainly it is not a match. So you believe it's a match. The FDA, I use the word consistent, is not a match. Very specifically, it's just a guess based on numbers. Would that ring a bell with you?
I would have to defer to the FDLE analyst on that.
Okay. Going back to the Julie Green case, it is correct that they located a mold, they made a mold of a tire frame just a few feet from where she was, where the homicide was committed, is that correct?
Yes.
And that was sent to Miss White, FDA expert, and she came back with a conclusion that the tire found out of Euclid was an absolute match. Is that correct?
I'm sorry, it was not a match?
It was a match.
It was a match.
Yes, yes, sir. Is that correct?
That is my understanding, yes.
Well, what was done about that? As far as checking with Euclid, where the tire came from, when it was delivered, did they have any records or anything? How they got that tire in their pile tires?
I know that was investigated, from what I'm told, I wasn't around at that time, but from what I'm told, that was investigated. And no one was ever able to determine where that tire came from.
At one time, is it correct that some of the principals at that tire place were suspects in this case?
I don't know if you call them a suspect, but definitely a person of interest, yes.
Yeah, well, they were followed, weren't they, by police departments at length, is that correct?
Yes, sir.
And they were surveilled under surveillance out there. What was the purpose of all that?
I believe it was to maybe obviously to watch the person to see where that person was going, and then I believe also to possibly collect DNA.
And that's the location where the tire that matched the mold that was found at the Julie Green homicide location was an absolute match.
Yes.
Now, you also mentioned, I wrote down here, that there was no match between the DNA found on the beer can and the discarded cigarette down in West Palm Beach County. Am I correct on that? There was no match then with associating the DNA on Patton?
I
write that down?
I believe so.
I believe so, we wrote this thing down wrong, or?
Sorry. Yes, I believe you wrote that down wrong.
Okay. And I correct that, right? But you did mention there was someone that didn't match. Do you recall in the testimony?
I believe Mr. Urbanik was asking about whether or not Mr. Hayes' DNA matched the DNA recovered from Ms. Reed. And that was not a match.
It did not match.
Correct.
So there was DNA recovered from this criminal. Do we know if it was and that was tested against the DNA from the beer bottle. So it was actually, we know that that's Mr. Hayes, and there was no match in the DNA. Was any further investigation done then on the actual DNA found on her that it could belong to some third person?
My understanding is that the DNA recovered from Ms. Reed was collected, analyzed, and is entered into CODIS. To this day, there has not been a match.
So it was the third party's DNA that CODIS could not give you a match.
Correct. There has not been a CODIS hit on that particular DNA as of yet.
I'm not going to start asking you questions about the evidence that you have in these three cases up here, because that's not what your testimony is about today. Your testimony is about to see if there's some match with the case that occurred down in West Palm Beach. That's basically what we're trying to establish here.
Sounds good.
I guess I made a statement instead of a question.
All right.
I would like to make a standing objection that all of the hearsay testimony that's given today, I appreciate this for hearing its permissible, that it not be admissible in the trial in chief.
I agree with you. This is akin to the likes of a proffer,
Yes,
which is a loose standard of evidence. In fact, we don't even have to have witnesses. The state can just proffer it in a statement. But that does not mean a ruling on admissibility. The rules of evidence at trial are substantially different.
yes,
So I concur with your analysis.
yes. Also, I think if any portion of it, the term serial killer should at least be, that those two words should be redacted. In case somebody reads that testimony.
Okay.
Yes, sir. When you interviewed, I guess it was you who went down to interview Mr. Hayes when he was at West Palm Beach,
Yes, sir.
and this is the first time you spoke with him personally.
I attempted to speak to him several times.
Okay. When did that happen?
I know I attempted to speak to him, I believe, the day that he was arrested. And then I believe I went down a couple of weeks later. And then I believe I attempted at least one other time.
Now, when you first spoke with him after he was arrested, that was in the jail? He was in the jail when you did that, or did you bring him over to your office?
The first time it would have been in an interview room at the Palm Beach County Sheriff's Office.
And did you at any time give him a warning that he'd be entitled to an attorney or ask him if he wanted an attorney?
Yes, sir.
You did ask him that, right?
Yes, sir.
And then when's the second time that you?
I believe the second time was approximately, I don't have the dates in front of me, approximately 2 weeks later.
And where was that?
I believe that was also at the sheriff's office.
And again, did you instruct him that he was entitled to an attorney?
I believe so. Again, I don't have it in front of me, I'd have to review. I believe so, but I don't, not 100% positive.
And during those procedures, don't you have him sign a paper indicating that you've given him all your rights?
Not necessarily.
You read him off a card? How would you do that?
Usually off of a card or a piece of paper.
Do you know what you did in this situation?
I don't recall.
And then the next time you spoke with him, but he was moved down to West Palm Beach, correct? And then did you have a conversation down there with him?
Yes, sir.
And, where did that conversation take place?
There was one time that it was in the jail, at the Palm Beach County Jail.
And did the record show that you gave him the punishments of being entitled to an attorney?
I believe that time, I don't even think he came into the interview room.
So you didn't glean any information from him at that point?
Correct.
The information you gleaned from him here, was any of an incriminating nature?
What do you mean by here?
When the first two interviews you had, in your investigation. In your office.
Okay.
Are you talking about 2006?
Yes, well, no, when he was arrested in 2019.
Oh,
Both of those occurred in Palm Beach County. Both of those in attempted interviews.
Did he make any incriminating statements to you that you used in that?
No, sir.
When did you get information from Ryan Howell?
Mr. Howell wrote a letter to the state attorney's office. I believe it was September 2020.
And what did he claim?
He claimed that he killed. In his letter, he wrote Julia, Julia, Green. But he said that he appeared to be admitting that he killed Miss Green.
Did you go and interview Mr. Howell?
I attempted to, yes.
And what happened?
He admitted to writing the letter, but he would not speak other than that. I believe he requested an attorney.
Did you do any background checking on him to see if he in fact was in the same cell with Mr. Hayes? Or where did this conversation allegedly take place? I guess is my question to you.
When did my conversation with Mr. Howell take place?
No. The allegations of Mr. Howell's making against Mr. Hayes' admissions, where and when did that supposed to take place? Oh, I'm sorry, it was Mr. Howell who admitted to the murder?
Yes.
Okay. Did you do any verification or checking out anything about information that he had given you? Could he have done it? Was he out of prison when these murders occurred?
But my understanding is that Mr. Holland was not in custody when Miss Green was murdered.
What other follow-up did you do to eliminate him as a viable suspect?
I know the state attorney's office obtained his medical records, and for lack of a better term, he appears to be crazy.
Wouldn't it be also correct that sometimes crazy people commit homicides?
Correct.
So except for the fact that you look at his medical records, that's the only reason you didn't follow through on his admission?
That, well, also, Kate, we took into consideration the fact that the three murders were the three murders in Daytona Beach were linked via evidence via ballistics and or DNA. And my understanding is that Mr. Hollow was in custody at the time of the murder of Ms. Gunther in December of 2005.
And my question on this, was it Julie Green who did not match with the DNA in Mr. Hayes?
Correct.
And it's Julie Green who, this Mr. Howell, had given you a statement that he had committed that homicide. Did you get his DNA to see if it matched the unknown DNA that was found on this?
Yes, we did obtain, via a search warrant, we did obtain a DNA sample from Mr. Howell, and it did not match the unknown DNA from Ms. Green.
And just, I won't belabor this one, but just briefly, did he tell you, I'm talking to Mr. Howell, how he committed the homicide, any information that would lead you to believe that there's some authenticity to his statement?
He did not tell us anything that day, other than the only thing in his letter, he says that he's the person who murdered Julia Green.
Thank you.
All right, thank you. Anything else from the Detective Bernardi?
Your
Oh, I'm sorry, yeah, go ahead.
maybe we can defer before we.
Sure.
Briefly, I just have a couple of questions. You're actually a lead detective only in the Volusia County case, correct?
Yes, sir.
And it is correct that you are not a DNA expert, are you?
I am not a DNA expert.
The DNA testimony or statement you gave, or the testing analytical results given by an FDA expert, and not you.
Correct.
And is it your understanding as lead detective that the male DNA collected from the Volusia County murder victims, Aquila Gunther, and I want to match the DNA collected from the South Florida beer can and cigarette that Mr. Hayes had described?
That is my understanding, yes.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Anything else?
Just briefly, Your Honor. Technically, I want to talk to you real quick about the Deland you pull it and the person of interest at Deland you pull it. Do you recall that person of interest's name?
Yes, Gary Mansfield.
And was he working at the Deland you pull it?
Yes, he was.
At some point, did he submit to a buccal swab with the task force of the police department?
Yes, sir.
And did his DNA match any of the foreign male DNA recovered from the first victim and the third victim?
No, it did not match.
Thank you, Detective.
Thank you. Anything else?
Well, the only other question, was it tested against the Julia Green's DNA sample? Do you know?
I'm not sure if it was.
Thank you.
All right, thank you. Anything else?
No, Your Honor.
All right, thank you, Mr. Step down.
Thank you, Your Honor.
Okay, you have another witness?
I do, Judge Tom Youngman.
Sure. Why don't we take I'm gonna break at 11 o'clock, probably a hard break at 11 o'clock, but let's take a quick bathroom break, 5-10 minutes. Price, please. I need one of you guys to let me know.